All right. Good evening. Time to start our Bible class. So we're continuing to look at the study of Moses, the Bible characters of Moses, and we finished up the week before that with Joseph. So if you would like to go ahead and open up to Exodus chapter 2, we're going to pick up around 11 and start there. Before we continue, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer real quick. Our most blessed Father, thank you so much for this opportunity that we've been blessed with to be able to come to you and to study and to pour out our hearts and our desires to you, but to be able to study together freely and to examine these characters, these real people of faith that live before us and all their frailties and struggles that they had, that we can learn from them and draw strength and courage that we as well have the same opportunities and abilities to be victorious in our service to you. And we ask, Father, that you would help us always to be humble servants and glorify you in everything we do and say. In Jesus' name, amen. So like I said, when we talk about the idea of Moses, is, you know, a lot of times we just kind of minimize, and we get it. We just kind of like, yeah, Moses, big guy, you know, we get it. But I think it's really important for us to really think about the greatness of who he was. There's so many aspects to him. This image I have, you know, I really struggle with ever using images in artwork, but there's something about that picture. I know it's not the greatest in here in the auditorium, that just, there's this idea, one, you can't see his face because we don't know what he looked like. We don't know some things, but there's something about that picture to me personally that symbolizes so much about him. And the way we see his birth, his life, and the entrance of him coming into Egypt, and the way that God is fulfilling his plan, it continues to be something that all of us struggle with. And the same thing we see with the children of Israel, going all the way back to Joseph being thrown into Egypt in slavery. If we go back to that, not fully being able to live in the moment and suffer with everything that's going on around us, but not be able to see, well, wait a minute, this is God's big plan. We see that. This is that 400-year period. Oh, yeah, that's right. No, they were all busy living their lives, and Joseph's in slavery, and all this is going on, and then he elevates up to being a prince, and, you know, it's just that all these things are happening, but we forget about what's God doing. You know, we think, well, somehow he's letting it drift. It's kind of like the canoe in the river, you know, just kind of flowing along, and then all of a sudden something happens. But we've seen, I hope, through looking at Joseph, that God's providence has continually been there. He is working his plan. It's not on our timeline at all. But he had made a promise. He said, your people are going to go into captivity. They're going to be there for 400 years. I'm going to deliver them out, and I'm going to give them this land, and they're going to go into that land. There's a lot of vagueness to it. There's maybe some lacking of details that we would all desire to have, right? I mean, that's in our faith too. There's a lot of things that would say, okay, heaven, could you send me some brochures? You know, could you send me some pictures and some more detail on how I'm going to endure this journey? And that's why I like studying these characters. Moses absolutely was an amazing man of faith. But like many things that we can really learn from him, that we can model in our lives, and we honestly can. And so when we started out, we looked at this time period that Moses picks up as he starts to write the book of Exodus. And I want you to remember that as we're reading through this, Moses is the writer. And a lot of times, if you're writing your own book, you know, you tend to want to glaze over a few things. Like that one time that you kind of want to. And that's something that I appreciate, that I'll point out as we go along, that where Moses exposes the truth of who he is and how he has interacted and things and such. But so historically, we come to that completion of 400 years. And the children of Israel in a position geopolitically where the pharaohs have forgotten about the greatness of Joseph, and now they're fearful. They've become very fearful of what these Hebrews are going to do. Remember, they've already had that experience with Hyksos pharaohs that had come in and invaded. So they have a lot of anti-Semitic values, and now they're watching these people in a very plush area Geographically, when you look at strategically, they're lined against some enemies coming in from Canaan that could come in. And if these people, they're foreigners, if they were to then associate with any other armies, it would be very easy for them to be overrun again. So this Pharaoh, forgetting history, not understanding that, this Joseph turned Egypt around, saved Egypt. And so he doesn't know the history of them. And so he decides, he initiates what I call the three-step plan. First, we're going to try to, oppress them and just enslave them and try to control them. Beat them into this slave mentality where they will never have the ability or desire to join into any enemy forces coming. It doesn't work. The more they oppress them, the more they go. So next phase, get the midwives, because they're there when the babies are born. And just whenever the baby males are born, you midwives, you kill them. And then that doesn't work, right? Because the midwives, they're not going to do it. They love babies. Midwives are not going to be killing. They're the last ones to get to work in an abortion clinic. It's somebody who is a beautiful, somebody who loves to deliver babies and such. So that doesn't work. So phase 3, anybody that's Egyptian, if you see a male Egyptian baby, throw him in the river. And so then we come to the point where then when Moses is born, that his mother tries to keep him and protect him for 3 months, but we reach a point where she can no longer do so. I want to emphasize again this idea of her putting him in a basket wasn't the idea that I think that maybe I had at my own ignorance, was somehow she put him in this little basket and let him float, put him in the river and let him float. We went back and kind of looked at that, she placed him in a strategic location, which I don't know if she directly knew or absolutely at minimum providentially placed that basket to where Miriam, his sister, was able to guard and watch and see what's happening. And then also, that was going to be a perfect location for Pharaoh's daughter to come out. And that's exactly what happens. We don't know how long, but just imagine, can you imagine putting a 3-month-old in a basket? How do you keep that baby quiet? I mean, he's still a baby, there's just a part of that whole aspect of putting a child like that. And imagine, now think about his mother, how that must have been so torturous for you to take your child and put him in a basket and hide him in a swampy area of the river. And how insecure and how unsafe he is. But she's doing this because of a lot of reasons, I think in a way providentially, and the way that her faith is guarding this child. And she may not outrightly understand the importance of what she's doing, but I do believe God's hand is in this. Because then the Pharaoh's daughter comes out, she sees the child, Miriam happens to be there. Hey, you want me to get you a mom that can nursemaid? Guess what? It's Moses' mom. So he's raised at home at least until he's weaned, which again, we don't know. Some go up to the age of 5 or so. We looked at Hannah, when Samuel was born, that he was at home with Hannah until a certain age, and then Hannah took him to Eli in the temple. So that probably 10-ish, but the thing, I think he was a little older than like a year and a half, like some of our children when we describe the word weaned from the mother, because of the faith that he seems to have. There is something that he's been given and trained. And you look at young kids, my grandkids, 5, 7, 8 years old, they know God. They may not have, but they have a core. They have this understanding. They're going to Bible classes, things like that. I think that's what we see later on come up, because Moses is aware of his heritage. And that's going to bring him to a point of conflict. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that, remember, in this slavery and all this that's going on, how long is he going to be raised in Pharaoh's house is huge because of, and I'm going to scan through these and get there because I'm kind of already talked through them anyway, is his age. How old was he before he has this encounter that we're going to read about with the Egyptian when he goes out?
Wasn't he about 40?
He's 40 years old. Now think about a 40-year-old man. He's not a teenager. How much do you think he's fitting into the Egyptian way of life? Well, he's still in he's still in good standings in Pharaoh's house. So, if we look, we see the way that he was educated was equal with all the other, I would say, when we say a prince, it's really kind of the nephews or grandchildren of the males of the king. So he would be included as well. Now, we're not told, but, I still kind of wonder, this is just one of those things you kind of go, about, is that, did they not know he was Hebrew at some point? I mean, how do you hide this kid that he's not looking like his dad? Or there reaches a point where somehow this is going to come up, that boy Moses, remember, he's got an Egyptian name. We think of it as Hebrew, but it's not. It's really, truly Egyptian. So he's got the right name. Pharaoh's daughter's named him, but he's going to have a lot of attributes. He's still going to be different. But he's accepted is what I'm saying. Regardless of whether they identified or not, he is being fully trained in the education process of the kings. He has language, being able to speak Egyptian, to the point where really, just like Joseph, his brothers couldn't recognize him because he was Egyptian. His blood was Hebrew, but Joseph was Egyptian, culturally and everything else.
I get a feeling, though, that, Joseph, he was accepted and everybody liked him. I get a feeling that, the way when Moses, man, when they turn against him, they just turn against him. I think it really seems like there was some animosity all along between some of his brothers and sisters, maybe, or something going on.
That's kind of portrayed in some articles and things I've read, and even in movies. There's some movies that aren't real biblical, but they kind of build on that idea that there was a little bit of this animosity between the true bloodline of the Pharaoh versus this stepchild, Moses. But now, you think of the way that Joseph came on the scene. I mean, he came from the prison, and he responded and was able to solve a problem and absolutely demonstrate his worthiness. But still, like I pointed out when we were looking at Joseph, they did not like the Semitics, the ones from Canaan, the sheep herders. There was a lot of bitterness because of the invasion that the Hyksos had come in and overthrew the lower part of Egypt. There's a lot of hatred towards them. And so even Joseph coming up and being able to arise that, there must have been some discussion among like the Pharaoh's cabinet saying, really? A Semitic? A descendant of, why don't you send him back? But he was able to prove, and that's something I think that I think is a good lesson. Regardless of your race, your background, you know what? Even bad people recognize goodness.
I know, but he was loyal. That's why he was allowed to stay too. Moses was loyal.
Moses was loyal. To who?
To Pharaoh.
Yes. You mean Joseph was loyal or Moses?
Moses.
Yes. Well, I think that's it. That's what I mean, is that you see both of them. That's where I'm trying to bring that correlation kind of between Joseph's relationship to a lot of people and race that should have just rejected him, threw him out, killed him, got rid of him because he's a threat. I mean, just think of all the little minions and guys that run around the kings that would have been so jealous about them bringing Joseph and making him second to Pharaoh. He's got the king's ring? What? He's making all these decisions, and how long have I been working for Pharaoh? And yet, because of his goodness, and you see the way he interacted with the people, that Joseph was accepted. They loved him. He respected him. And I think Moses is the same. And that in spite of his upbringing, his origin, he was able to integrate. And I think that's something that I picked up on, is that as a Christian, that's us. We are not of this world. Our Father is totally different.
We're foreigners in this world.
We are foreigners.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it was God's providence anyway. It was going to circumvent no matter what people tried to do. God had his plan, and he was going to make sure that it was
And that's what you see. I mean, if you even look at the letters written by historians during the Roman Empire, there was a lot of people writing to the emperors, Trajan and other ones, that were saying, these Christians are good people. There is no reason for you to go and attack and kill them. They're better citizens than Romans. And for a long time, even though we have this idea that somehow from the time that Christianity showed up, Romans just started killing them. That's not true. That is far from it. It was sporadic and it was localized in different regions. But there's only 2 emperors, and it wasn't until like the 4th century that legitimately went to genocide Christians. They wanted, and it didn't work. That one emperor, and it was just prior to Constantine. So, because they were good, they were accepted. And that's what I'm saying about us. If we are born of Christ, if we're born of God, yes, the world should not be accepting us, but they will, because they see and they recognize goodness, and they want goodness, and they will accept you because they will see that you're being blessed. They'll see something unique about us. And that's what I see in this. This is just one of those character things about this. But now, so let's pick up in our text in chapter 2, verse 11, and one day. So, in other words, here's a point in his life, around 40, and it says he's grown up. 40's grown up. He goes out to his people. Look at this. Look at the way that... Now, Moses is writing this. It's kind of third person, but he's writing it. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and he looked on their burdens, and he saw the Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way, that way, seeing no one. He struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. So Moses, it's not that he was unaware. I mean, he's 40 years old. Come on. You're telling me that this is the first day that you woke up and realized that the Hebrews are being abused? You don't think there's talk around the house, around the king's house, about those low-life Hebrews and how they, there had to be this understanding of a certain level of treatment. So I think what Moses is trying to say about himself, he reached a point in his life where he wanted to see, and he went out, and I think he wanted to try to become an influence. He wanted to inject himself, or somehow believing that his education, his knowledge, and all this was going to enable him to have an influence to help them. But they only see an Egyptian. That's all he is to the Hebrews. He is not accepted among his people. Now, this is where we get into the Christ-like images. He's coming to his own what? Reject him.
Yeah.
They reject him. Now, from understanding this, this apparently is not just any Egyptian, just some Egyptian beating randomly a Hebrew. This is an Egyptian official. Most scholars have all said this is not just some worker Egyptian guy whipping on somebody like sometimes you see. This is more of an official person. That's what makes the seriousness of it. Now, I don't know how much this plays into it, but I do know that this was something that was what they call the Bedouins, or the tribes that meandered, as well as this culture that the Asians had from the Canaan area that you defended. And if you saw somebody from your tribe being abused, you had the right to kill and defend, if it meant killing that other person, to defend one of your own. I read that and I thought, okay, but I don't know that I could necessarily say that was his motivation. Him justifying, well, they're my people and this is our culture, and so we can, no. He's too much Egyptian, so I don't buy into the fact that this is, he has a right somehow culturally with his people to kill someone. I don't believe that. I think that, like I said, he reached a point in his life where he felt like that he was going to be able to have this influence, and he had reached a point where of just seeing this abuse that he took advantage of it. But notice he does it. Why did he have to kill him? And I think we forget about this aspect because it kind of gets, left behind as we go along, that, Moses is a murderer. There's no justification in a lot of ways
But if you look and it says he looked this way and that way, so he was going to hide it, and then he hid him in the sand anyway. So, I mean, he's acting like the police.
He is. He knows
His
that
own
it's,
police. Yeah.
he knows it's wrong. He's
But he knows
looking,
it's gonna go back to the Hebrews. He knows that this word's gonna go back. Somebody is defending us.
so is it, and it doesn't say that they were or were not necessarily. I mean, I've always thought that the way it sounds, that when this was occurring, then he killed him. And therefore the Hebrews were there, but no other Egyptians when he looked left and right. But I don't think I can say that. I mean,
He says he saw no one.
we don't, exactly. So, so did he wait and he watched him abuse him and then catch him somewhere, like in a dark alley, and then kill him? I mean, but the point is, he's trying to cover it up. He's trying to, but it doesn't work out. I also think with all of his education and refinement of being in there in the Pharaoh's house, this shows an impulsiveness, which that is a part of his character. There is a little bit of that flaw with him, that Moses can be a little.
Well, I'm sure in the household they were constantly talking about the Hebrews too. How bad the Hebrews are. Look what they're doing. Look how they're, no matter what we do to them, they just keep overpowering and they keep growing. And so I'm sure he got tired of it too.
Well, and if he realizes what she does, and that's why I think when we look back at his upbringing with his mother, that's where he learned this. He knew that, that's where he's from. How much of God's plan does he understand? Obviously he doesn't. He knows God, he has faith in God, and he understands that God is the one he wants to serve after, because we know this is a decision point where he chose. The Hebrew writer tells us very clearly that he chose at this point to suffer with the children of Israel, the Hebrews, versus going and living as Pharaoh's son, and refused that. Now this makes it sound like he ran like a coward, like he killed him and just took off. Mm-hmm. And that's really, the other thing is in Acts 13, where we read, I think it's, I don't know who it was, and I just lost it, where we have a part of one of the gospel messages in the historical, one of those long sermons where they're talking about the history. It brings up the fact that he was trained, and that there's also indications that he actually probably even led in the army, the military of the Egyptian army. I mean, he was not a weakling. He was a strong personality with them as an Egyptian as well. So combat-wise, education, but why did he choose? There's something snapped, something impulsively brings him to murdering this Egyptian. And then he returns to the scene of the crime. It's like he goes back in verse 13. And then he went out the next day. What are you doing, Moses? How many people return to the scene of the crime? It's like, just lay low. But it's because of this thing I'm saying, he wants to be a positive influence. He wants to help them. And he's thinking that he's able to do it. He's starting his plan of action of trying to help the children of Israel. This may be something, like we read about, like the dreams that Joseph had, but Joseph didn't understand them. Remember? He didn't, matter of fact, he didn't get them until probably right when before his brother showed up. Then he goes, he gets it, the dream and everything came to him. There may be something like this providentially where God is helping him, but he's choosing a little bit the harder path here to go. So then he goes out the next day, and behold, two Hebrews are struggling together, and he asks of the man in the wrong, which means what? That he made a judgment. He looked at one of them, and he decides, you can tell one of them's causing the problem, and then dresses him down. Why are you striking your companion? So he tries to mediate. And again, those two that are fighting, they just see an Egyptian official coming in and interrupting. And he answered, and he said, who made you prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, surely this thing is known. And when he heard of it, when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh, and he stayed in the land of Midian. and he sat down by a well. Now, one of the things, again, this makes it sound like, that we're talking like within the same day. In other words, day 1, killed Egyptian, buried him. Day 2, then he comes out, and then he sees them fighting and intervenes, and they threaten him. Day 3, Pharaoh finds out and he runs. That is not really the way that things are written a lot of times. This is why, because then if you go back and look at the idea that he chose, this doesn't sound like he chose here. The Hebrew writer said he chose to suffer. In other words, to associate and to become part of the guilt with what was going on with the Hebrews. And instead of, going back to Pharaoh and standing up, he let it stay. And so it developed to a point where charges were being brought against him. Remember, this is the Pharaoh's daughter, is his mom. Killing a Hebrew? How bad is it? I mean, killing an Egyptian official when you're the Pharaoh's grandson? And if he was in Pharaoh's house and integrated the way we just described, there's a part where it's possible he could have gone back and got out of trouble. But I think that what we're seeing, coupled with external verses like in Hebrews, that he didn't. He decided, no, I'm not. And he knew that if he didn't, then he better flee. He better just get out of there, because they're going to come after him. Because he's not going to relent, in other words, and say, okay, I was wrong, he should have beat him. I think it's a way of him rebelling against the Pharaoh's household by saying, no, this was wrong. I killed this guy, and so now he knows. But there still is a point, instead of standing fast and enduring it and standing up, and if his faith was with God, might have been able to lead the people out 40 years earlier. Now, I'm really speculating, okay, that's a real reach. But he doesn't choose that, does he? He chooses to do what? Run. And I think it was good, because we know that really he wasn't ready. Even though he was 40 years of age and he was mature and everything, it's still just not the right. These are little moments sometimes of tragic events that Christians commit that you look at and you live with, but later on, God is able to help use these things to help keep you humble and realize who you are and that you're really nothing without God. And sometimes that takes us a little time between our transgressions or something that we may have fallen down on as a Christian in our lives. But years later, we can look back and go, I'm just saying, if I was like Moses going, man, I killed that Egyptian 40 years ago, that was so wrong, and it just kind of recreates some of our frailties and making us a better servant in doing what God wants. So now, he ends up in the land of Midian, which is on the other side of Sinai, which is an interesting place. Now, the other thing is, how did he get there? There's some simple, why he doesn't sit and give us a description of a fugitive on the run. He went and jumped on a camel and took off, racing off the desert, that type of thing, is he didn't. He probably traveled with caravans that were traveling. And again, they didn't have the type of communications that we would see today where, it would be very easy for him, in other words, to slide out and get on and travel on out and leave ahead before everything got into motion and they started to come after him. And so he travels along, and because Midian is one of those areas where those caravans traveled through. One of the main trade routes next that would run parallel to the King's Highway on the eastern side, and going up into like Canaan and north up into the northern regions and Turkey and areas. Now, after he's there, he sits down by a well. Isn't it interesting that a lot of stuff, the social places, is where? Around a well.
They had to have water, and people
Exactly.
gathered there.
That's
just
yeah.
The water cooler.
Yeah, the water. That's where you would go. Ours today might be the Walmart. Everybody seems to go to Walmart to get what's survived. But I just, when you read about the importance of water and the wells, that would be a place, So, of course, that would be a general location Who else that was one of the patriarchs that had a encounter at a well?
Jesus,
Huh?
Jesus.
Well, Jesus, true. But I was thinking of patriarch. The patriarchs. Jacob. Remember when he went to where he was at? He was sitting at a well and they were waiting. And Rebecca comes up, and you see the well. Whenever Abraham sent his servant to go find the wife for Isaac, where was it at? It was at the well when they were
Right.
coming up. So it just, that's the social center of water, the importance of life there. So just to pick up, we're going to go into 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and they drew water and filled the troughs to the water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. Again, Moses is not one. He's somebody who has that part of his personality. He might be a refined Egyptian educated man, but this is one of these attributes of his character, that he is somebody who is trying to provide justice, regardless, and seeing the way that these shepherds had treated them. So when let's just jump over, because there's so many verses, I just didn't want to sit there and copy all of those, but over in 18, kind of summarize through. They go home in 18, they go back to their father, Reuel, and they tell him, how'd you get home so quick? And so they say, now this is what's interesting, in 19, they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hands of the shepherds. And so now you have an Egyptian, that's exactly what they see. And he watered the flock. So he's inquiring about it and says, well, where is this guy? He said, where have you left him? Oh, well, we just probably back at the well, you don't bring stray boys home. It's like, so these daughters are, the father's like, well, let's reward him. So they call him, and Moses, and this is where it kind of summarized, but then it says Moses was content to dwell with the man, and Moses gave his daughter Zipporah, and she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. So when I read that this afternoon, I thought, he's kind of a sojourner in a foreign land when he was in Egypt, because that's not their land. But that's not, I think, what the text is saying here. He is living basically away, but is Egypt really his homeland? Well, that's where his descendants, his heritage, all the other Hebrews are there. So, but remember the importance of names. We've been seeing that, what those names mean. They describe something, and even today, a lot of today we name our children after important people in our family. Maybe not as much about it, but it reminds us of a character or something of that person that you're honoring. And these are moments or ideas that Hebrews would name their children to reflect. Now, I want to get to, yeah, we're doing good on time. In 23, well, first off, look at the map. I did bring this, pull this map up. Oh, it's kind of horrible in here, but I think online you'll be able to see a little better. But Midian is way up there to the very right. If you can see, I think I can.
You see. Yeah.
And that's what's interesting is when you talk about where is Mount Horeb, and archaeologists trying to find where they crossed the Red Sea and all these things. We'll talk a little more later on, but Midian is on the east side of the Aqaba, I guess they call that. The Red Sea is the larger one to the left of Sinai there. So he's quite a distance away from there. So now Moses now comes back while he's off and he's in exile as a fugitive. We see where now the reflection of what is going on back in Egypt. Now, 40 years, so that's why when it says in 23, during those days, so these days that Moses is reflecting is the days in the period that he is away, that Pharaoh died. That Egypt king died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue came up to God. And God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Now there's something interesting about verses 23 through 25 here. He uses God repetitively. You see, when it starts in here, it says, they cried to God. God heard them. God remembered. God saw. And this is Moses and really kind of God bringing up this aspect of this great part of the connection of God fulfilling his promise. Like, for example, when we use the words that somebody heard you, you kind of get the idea that maybe they weren't really paying attention. Or at some point when you say somebody heard me, then something you said got them to, what was that? You know, I heard you. Which we know that that's not really God, right? I mean, God doesn't go, you know, he's not like just existing and all of a sudden go, oh, well, I heard them. And it's not like all of a sudden he goes, oh man, I just remembered. And you know, so if God remembered, does that mean he possibly can forget? Well, of course not. That's the beauty of what he's saying here, is really what he's talking about is this idea of God now taking action.
That's what I was going to say. He circumvented. He couldn't stand the cries coming up to him, the continuous cries of these people.
And it's the idea that God has not forgotten about what they're going through. I mean, now remember, they've already been suffering 40 years, at least from the time we picked up in Exodus, that the persecution began, to 40 years when Moses, there's at least 40 hard years that we know, plus possibly a few years before Moses even came on. Remember, Pharaoh had been trying a few things to limit them, and he had already started repressing them. So for 40 years, this has been going on, and they've been just driven down. And you know, a lot of times you think, well, why couldn't they just live out the 40 years and then just go out? You know, he never said to Abraham, they're going to go away for 40 years and just suffer. He never told him that. So what is the need for God to allow Pharaoh to abuse him? Why couldn't they go out in the glory of the days of Joseph? I'm just asking, you know, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, he could have kept their status, and, you know, the pharaohs could have continued to remember Joseph and all that he did and the glory of Joseph saving Egypt, and the Hebrew people were just respected because of what Joseph did, and, you know, kind of like George Washington to us, you know, and just been something glorious. But no, we find that God's allowing this to happen. I'm not saying he's causing it, but there's more to this idea that, you know, yes, he could have kept them in a good status, and that, you know, Moses came along, and then all of a sudden he's going to go to Pharaoh because they get along so well, and going, hey, you know, all those good old Hebrews that you like so well and respect, we're going to take off. Oh, okay, go ahead. I mean, yeah, that's an option, but there's something more that's going on that's necessary. And it does play into that we don't understand sometimes, is that, again, it's not that God is inflicting this on them. Don't ever think I'm saying that. What he's demonstrating is, man left to his own devices, this is what he'll degrade into. They don't respect one another. The Egyptian culture, and if you let them on their own, this is what they will evolve into, this hatred and racism and repression. And the people, what this is setting up is the great demonstration of Yahweh to the world. To the world. From, just think about, From that moment on, when he delivered the children of Israel out and parted that Red Sea, the entire human race has always known about that Yahweh of the Hebrews. Prior to that, what did they know about him? They heard that this guy Jacob had a dream about ladder. They heard about how rich this guy Abraham, who had this Yahweh God. But what had God ever done that the world would say decisively, I am, I am?
I'm thinking these, the Egyptians are like, you always tell us about your God. Where is he?
It's the same, yeah.
Yeah. When's he going to come?
And it's coming. So now, let's apply it to us. Especially like in our country today, where our values are completely upside down. I mean, if there's ever a time that Christianity is being debased, hated on, it's now. And they don't see the victory that's coming. This to me is a reminder as well that there is a great deliverer. Moses is a Christ type. And yes, Jesus may be away, but he's coming. And there is going to be a final encounter with the world, and he's going to deliver his people out and be victorious over all the evil that's going to try to crush us, enslave us in sin. And this is what God is showing is repetitive. God's not doing it, but this is what desires and selfishness and sinfulness does, is it will attack goodness, it'll attack God, but God is going to come up and allow that you to, in your sinful condition, to be embarrassed and defeated and humbled. That's what he's going to do. Because remember, Egypt's not just any nation either. This isn't a third world country. This is a first-class, powerful nation of all the nations in there. They're the most powerful. They got the breadbasket. They've got the strongest military. This is one of the strongest dynasties. It's not until after Pharaoh that Egypt starts to downslide, and they're never going to be the power that they were. The glory of the Egyptians is going to stop after Moses departs Egypt. But to this point, it's like the United States or China or Russia, the most powerful nation, is fixing to just take a fall. And it's going to be by a bunch of slaves. And so when we look at this, yes, the people are being oppressed. They're being, just like the first century Christians were, they were being brutalized. And John's revelation to them was what? Don't worry. We are victorious. This is what we have here. We have God's people. He's going to deliver them. They're not going to earn it. They're not going to deserve it by any means. But God is faithful. God is faithful. God is faithful. We got to keep saying that. Regardless of our faith, no matter how little or few we think we are, God is faithful and he will always be victorious. This world cannot crush God's kingdom. Cannot.
Christians have to be faithful too.
That's us. That's exactly what I'm saying. We may, in a lot of ways, see ourselves in that condition of the Egyptian slaves or the first century Christians who are being brutally attacked and ridiculed. But both of those should prove to us today we're the winners. We will be victorious. But we just don't know all the details, do we? Wouldn't we love to have those? And that's like these people. They're crying out to God. We're crying out to God. I know there's a lot of Christians praying hard, crying out to God now. How long? That sounds like exactly what the prophet Habakkuk cried out. How long? How long? Are we going to put up? But God does not forget. So this is why I say these 24 and 25 are beautiful, because this idea of really showing the power of the covenant promise and his faithfulness, and that he has been in action. Think about it. God has never deviated. He is fulfilling his plan exactly. He just hasn't kept you up to date. He hasn't sent them little updates. Update, year 200. I'm still here, guys. We're still working on this, update. No, God is working. God is in there, and we saw that through Joseph's life, and now we're at 400 years. It's exactly what he said. It's going to happen. And he's bringing up a deliverer. He just isn't ready yet. And it's going to take some more years, isn't it? So we're going to stop there because next week we're going to look at Moses' encounter with God. And the reason I want to hold that is because there's a lot just in the conversations that he has that I want us to be able to break down and discuss. So any comments, thoughts, or...
That last verse said up there, God knew, like, in one of the Bibles, it said God took notice of them and God acknowledged them.
What was the last part, Gary, you said?
Took notice instead of knew. One of them said took notice, and the other one said acknowledged them. God acknowledged them. That there didn't. I kind of like the others better.
You know, I think that's why the transcript or some of the translations that I use, I go back to try to grab that because I think sometimes it's hard to we're talking about taking Hebrew, ancient Hebrew that's been translated into Greek, that now has been translated into English, from old Queen's English to modern English to our English today. It doesn't even sound the same as they spoke in the 1800s in America. I mean, if you read some writings from the founding fathers, they got some weird, I heard one that I love, rascality. Yeah, I was reading a book, and he talks about how much rascality was going on in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Rascal, okay, you know the word rascal? You know, a bunch of misfits, trouble. Rascality, a bunch of misfit activity. And I heard that, and I'm like, I looked at it, and I go, we never use that word. That's a perfect illustration of, when we talk about, like, even translation, rascality. I love that word. It describes my boys when I was raising them. There was a bunch of rascality going on in that bedroom back there, So I think you have to, kind of look at some of the other translations and look and understand, because I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but that's what makes it exciting to look at it, but all right.
We have to remember that God sees all, hears all, and knows all.
Well, that's it. He never forgot him, but I think that's why those verses, we will skip over them, because it's hard to think that he could forget. It's not that he didn't hear them. He was hearing them all the time. But it's a point that's coming together that he's showing that now the awareness is coming into action. That he never forgot. He knew Moses was coming. He knew what he was doing. But I think that it does show this emotional side of the people's condition, and God showing through what he's writing here, the beauty of him saying, I haven't forgot you. Those words are for us. If you think about it, remembering, it's us reminding, like you've done that. I've told people, I remembered. Why would you say that? Because you would think the other person might have forgotten. No, I remembered to come over. And because the other person would think, I think he forgot. So I think it's kind of that too, where Moses is writing and saying, God remembered. Because the people think he forgot, which we know he can't. So, okay, good discussion. Well, thank you very much. We hope you can make it with us. Bible study 9:45 on Sunday morning, 10:45 for worship. And we hope to see you soon. God bless.